What would you do if the woman you saved from a snowstorm vanished without a word, only to return as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, pretending she was someone else? Jack Callahan wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just a tired single dad, finishing another 12-hour shift at Jackson Hole Auto Works. His hands were black with grease, his back ached from hours bent over engines, and all he wanted was to get home to his daughter Emily. She'd asked that morning, hope shining in her big brown eyes. "Daddy, can we work on my science fair project tonight?" Jack had smiled, despite the exhaustion weighing down his bones. "Of course, kiddo. We'll make it the best one in the whole school." But that promise was getting harder to keep with every passing mile. The snowstorm had rolled in faster than expected. By the time Jack turned onto the mountain road leading to their cabin, the world had disappeared into a wall of white. Wind howled through the trees. The Silverado's heater wheezed, barely warming the freezing air inside the cab. On the passenger seat, Emily's bright pink backpack leaned against an old thermos. A crayon drawing of the solar system peeked from a folder, Jupiter smiling next to a lopsided Earth. Just a few more miles, Jack told himself. He could almost see her in the kitchen, waiting with Coco and too many questions. But fate had other plans. As he rounded a bend near Teton Pass, hazard lights blinked through the whiteout like a dying heartbeat. Jack's instincts flared. A white Range Rover sat at an angle on the shoulder, one wheel buried in a snowbank. No other cars, no movement. Jack pulled over, grabbed his flashlight, and shoved open the door. The cold hit like needles. Snow whipped sideways in the wind, biting through his flannel. He trudged toward the SUV, boots crunching over ice. The driver's door was ajar. He peered inside. A woman was slumped over the wheel, unmoving. "Mom?" He knocked hard on the frosted glass. No response. Heart thudding, Jack yanked the door open. Blonde hair spilled from beneath a wool scarf. Her skin was pale, too pale. Her lips were tinged blue. No pulse. A chill deeper than the snow ran through him. There was no signal out here, no time, just him and this woman hanging on the edge of death. He eased her out of the vehicle, laying her gently in the snow. His hands trembled as he tilted her head, began chest compressions. "Come on, stay with me." 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Repeat. Time warped. Snow gathered around them. His arms screamed in protest, but Jack didn't stop. She looked mid-30s. Elegant coat, gold Cartier watch on her wrist. Too polished for a back road in a blizzard. None of it mattered. Then, a gasp, so faint he almost missed it. But then another. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed, terrified. She coughed, barely breathing. "You're okay," Jack said, voice hoarse. "You fainted. I'm here. You're safe." Tears filled her eyes. She tried to speak, but no sound came. "Where?" "Teton Pass," he answered quickly. "Your car got stuck. I found you." He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shivering frame. "I'm Jack. We need to get you warm." She nodded faintly. "Ava," she whispered, then blinked. "Viv." Jack helped her into the truck, cranked the heat and turned back down the pass. 10 miles to the clinic. He didn't say much. Neither did she. The silence was thick with questions neither of them knew how to ask. At the clinic, nurses rushed her inside. Jack gave his statement. No ID, no idea who she was. Just a good Samaritan. An hour later, a nurse returned. "She's going to be okay. Severe dehydration, exhaustion." "Lucky you found her when you did." Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. But when he glanced toward her room, it was empty. The nurse handed him something. "She left this in your truck. Said to tell you she didn't want to cause trouble." It was the Cartier watch, Ellicott. Gold. He turned it over. Engraved on the inside, "Forever, Mom." She was gone. No last name, no phone number. Just a name that might not even be real. and a moment that felt more real than anything had in years. That night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, the watch resting beside his chipped coffee mug. Outside, the storm still howled. Upstairs, Emily slept soundly, unaware that her father's life had quietly shifted course. He turned the watch over in his hand again. Forever, Mom. No one leaves something like that by accident, not unless they want it to be found. The watch still sat on the table the next morning. Jack Callahan hadn't touched it. Sunlight pushed weakly through the frost on the windows. The storm had calmed, but the world outside remained cloaked in white silence. He sipped burnt coffee from his old chipped mug, eyes fixed on that delicate gold timepiece, like it might whisper the answers he didn't have. Forever, Mom. It wasn't the kind of thing someone forgot. Especially not someone like her. She had looked out of place the moment he pulled her from that luxury SUV, like a porcelain figure misplaced in a mechanic's world, pale, elegant, haunting. And now she was gone, leaving behind only a name that probably wasn't real. Ava, or Viv. Jack had seen plenty of people come through Jackson Hole over the years, some looking for adventure, some running from something. She hadn't said what, but he could see it in her eyes that night in the clinic. She was trying to disappear, and part of him understood that better than he cared to admit. Upstairs, Emily's laughter broke the stillness. She was awake, talking to herself, probably narrating her crayon-colored universe of planets and stars. Jack smiled faintly, rising to make breakfast, but even as he cracked eggs into the skillet, he found himself glancing toward the watch again. Meanwhile, 2 towns away, in a quiet Denver hotel room, Ava Sinclair stood in front of a window that framed the city skyline, glass towers, blinking lights, life moving on without her. The name Ava Sinclair still rang out across finance news tickers. CEO, visionary, powerhouse. None of them knew that 2 nights earlier she had nearly died on a mountain road, her body shutting down under the weight of burnout, grief, and a storm she never should have tried to outrun. She wrapped Jack's flannel jacket tighter around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of oil and pine, and something else. Something safe. Ava turned the watch over in her hand. The engraving caught the morning light. Forever, Mom. Leaving it behind hadn't been an accident. It had been a choice. The only way she could say thank you without unraveling. She couldn't explain. Not to him, not to herself. Not yet. The world knew Ava Sinclair as a titan of tech. Headlines loved to marvel at the deals she closed, the boardrooms she commanded, the empire she'd built from scratch. But none of those headlines knew how hollow it had all begun to feel. Her mother, Lillian, had been everything soft in a world that was hard. A painter who loved the mountains. A woman who believed beauty had power. When cancer took her, Ava was just 12. That spring, something inside her cracked, and her father, unable to cope, had thrown himself into work and never looked back. Ava had learned young that success was the only way to be seen. And so she chased it, ruthlessly, restlessly. Until one deal, the one meant to honor her mother's legacy, fell apart just weeks ago, sending her spiraling. The board blamed her. Her assistant walked on eggshells. Her therapist called it a crisis of identity. Ava called it drowning. So she'd driven no plan. No destination. Just away. The only place she could think to go was the old cabin at the base of Teton Pass, her mother's favorite escape, now left untouched for years. She hadn't expected the storm. She hadn't expected him. Back in Jackson Hole, Jack pulled into the garage just after 9. The watch was tucked carefully in a velvet pouch, hidden in the top drawer of his toolbox. He hadn't told anyone about the woman. About the night. About the look in her eyes when she came back to life in his arms. Some things felt too strange to explain. He tried to work, but his mind kept drifting. What kind of woman disappears from a hospital without giving her name? What kind of woman leaves behind something that clearly meant everything? That afternoon, Ava scrolled through local news on her phone with trembling fingers. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe proof that it had all really happened. Maybe his name. She found it buried in a sidebar. Local mechanic performs life-saving CPR during storm. No photo, just a name. Jack Callahan, owner of a small garage in Jackson Hole. No social media presence, no press, just a street address. Just him. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She could walk away. Pretend it never happened. Let the mountains keep the secret. But something inside her whispered, "Don't." And that's when it hit her. She didn't want to be Ava Sinclair right now. She wanted to be Viv, the version of herself that remembered how her mother's cabin smelled after summer rain. The girl who once believed in fresh starts and second chances. She didn't want a press conference. She wanted peace. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted a reason to go back. The next morning, a dusty Ford Bronco sat in the cabin's garage, untouched for over a decade. Her mother's pride. Her last project. The paint was faded, the engine long dead. But it was something. A reason, an excuse, a beginning. Ava brushed snow off the windshield, her breath fogging in the cold. Maybe she couldn't return as a CEO, but she could return as a daughter. As a woman with a broken truck and a broken heart, she would drive back to Jackson Hole and find the man who saved her. Not to explain everything, not yet, just to say hello. The peaks of the Tetons were still dusted with snow when Ava Sinclair returned to Jackson Hole. She had driven through the night, heart pounding with every mile. The road twisted through memory and fear, but her hands stayed firm on the wheel. She didn't wear makeup, no blazer, no assistant in tow. Just jeans, a navy sweater, and hair loosely tied back like her mother used to wear it. She had rehearsed a dozen versions of what she might say when she saw him again. None of them survived the moment she pulled into the lot of Callahan's garage. It was a modest place. Weather-worn siding, a faded wooden sign, and a row of tools lined up with precision only a man like Jack would bother with. The garage door was half open. She stepped out of the car. He was under the hood of a dusty old Chevy, grease on his hands, concentration in his jaw. When he looked up, their eyes met, and the world fell still for a heartbeat. He froze. She tried to smile. "Hi," she said softly, voice barely above the hum of the wind. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, cautious. "You bringing trouble?" Ava gave a small, nervous laugh. "Just a job, if you're willing." She held out a folded folder, paperwork, and a photo of the 1974 Ford Bronco that had sat in her mother's garage for years. "It was my mom's. I want it restored." Jack studied her, not just her face, but her posture, her words, the tremble she tried to hide. He didn't press, didn't ask what happened after the clinic, just nodded once. "I'll take a look." The cabin was as quiet as she remembered. Dust clung to the windows. The air carried the scent of pine and long-forgotten summers. Ava had barely stepped foot inside since her mother passed. But now, the silence didn't scare her. It felt like home. Jack came by later that week to see the Bronco. The garage was a time capsule. Tools still on the pegboard, old oil cans on the shelves, and her mother's watercolor sketches tucked into corners like ghosts. He didn't say much, just inspected the engine, made a few low whistles and nodded. "It'll take time. Parts are rare. But she's worth saving." So was I, Ava thought, but said nothing. She introduced herself simply as Viv. Not Ava Sinclair. Not CEO, just Viv, a woman with a truck, a past, and a quiet need to fix what was broken. Jack didn't ask questions, and she was grateful. For now. Emily, however, was another story. The little girl peeked out from behind her father's leg the first time Ava stopped by the garage. Big, curious eyes, a sprinkle of freckles and hair pulled into a messy ponytail. "Is she the lady from the snow?" Emily asked bluntly. Jack shot her a warning glance, but Ava knelt down, smiling. "Maybe," she whispered, "but only if you keep it a secret." Emily beamed like she'd just been told a fairy tale was real. In the days that followed, something unexpected began to happen. Viv kept coming back, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with old sketches her mum had drawn of the Bronco when it was still running. Sometimes just to watch Jack work, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. She asked questions, not like a client, but like a student. Why this bolt first? Why does that part matter more? Jack would grunt answers at first. Then slowly, he started offering more. And Viv? She listened, really listened. No boardroom, no timer ticking down, just the soft thrum of music from the old radio and the clang of tools. Emily took to her fast. She'd run in after school, cheeks red from the wind, plop down beside the workbench and chat non-stop. One afternoon, she looked up at her dad. "Can Viv help clean the wheels?" Jack raised a brow. "You trust her with grease?" Viv grinned, rolling up her sleeves. "Already better company than most board members I've met." Jack blinked. "Board members?" She covered quickly. "Book club, very intense." By week 3, the 3 of them had settled into a quiet rhythm. Viv helped sand panels. Jack let her hold the flashlight without complaining, most of the time. Emily drew stars and hearts on scraps of paper and taped them to the garage wall like murals. One evening, they shared sandwiches under the glow of a hanging light bulb. Viv watched Jack as he told a story about an old Chevy that caught fire, his laugh low, steady, real. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she heard a man laugh without it sounding rehearsed, without it costing something. She liked the way his silences felt safe, not cold, just earned. Still, the fear lingered. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. The world she left behind hadn't vanished. The board was growing restless. Charles Whitmore had left 4 voicemails. "Your absence is a liability," one had said. She ignored them all, but the guilt gnawed at her. What would Jack say if he knew? What would Emily think? She didn't have the answers yet. So for now, she focused on small things, rusted bolts, chipped paint, the way Emily's drawings grew more colorful by the day. And late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she'd stand on the porch of the cabin and whisper to the stars, "Not yet, just a little more time." There was something sacred about the sound of sandpaper. A soft, steady rhythm, like breath, like memory. Ava stood beside the old Ford Bronco, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers wrapped around a sanding block. Her arms ached. Her hair was a mess. There was a smudge of grease on her cheek she hadn't noticed, and she was smiling. Jack Callahan worked a few feet away, bent over the front bumper, humming to a tune from the old radio. Emily sat cross-legged near the back, sketching galaxies on scrap cardboard and offering commentary on everything from science fair projects to the best kind of jelly for PBJ. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast. But for the first time in years, Ava felt present. She was no longer calculating ROI or scanning for her next calendar alert. There were no email dings, no pitch decks, no rehearsed speeches. Just the grind of tools, the warmth of a heater rattling in the corner, and the low, steady voice of a man who had no idea he was saving her life in slow, patient strokes. Every morning, she returned. Sometimes with donuts, sometimes with questions, sometimes with nothing at all, just the ache of needing to be around people who didn't expect anything from her except honesty. Emily had officially declared herself garage manager. She made a paper badge and wore it proudly. "My job is to make sure no one's sad," she announced one Tuesday. offering Ava a lollipop with absolute sincerity. Ava accepted it like it was a contract. Mission accomplished. Jack watched it all unfold quietly. He wasn't a man of many words, but Ava noticed things in the way he worked, how he cleaned every tool before putting it away, how he let Emily talk without interrupting, how he looked at Ava, not like she was broken or fragile, but like she belonged. One afternoon, while tightening a stubborn bolt, she asked, "Have you always worked on cars?" He didn't look up. "Pretty much. Grew up with my dad in a garage just like this. After the fire, it felt right to come back." She didn't ask about the fire. The pause in his voice said enough. Some scars weren't meant to be explained, only carried. That evening, Miss Thelma, the cafe owner with eyes like she saw through souls, stopped by with thermoses of hot cocoa and fresh scones. She looked at Ava carefully, not judging, just seeing. "You're starting to breathe again," she said, handing her a mug. Ava blinked. "Excuse me?" Miss Thelma smiled softly. "You'd be surprised how long we hold our breath when we're hurting. Sometimes we forget what it's like to exhale." The words hit harder than Ava expected. She looked down at her hands, calloused, stained with oil. They didn't look like CEO hands anymore. They looked like someone real. One Friday, snow began to fall again, soft, light flakes that drifted like confetti. Emily squealed, grabbing her coat. "Viv, let's catch snowflakes on our tongues." Ava hesitated at the garage door. Snow had once meant danger, a near-death memory she hadn't dared revisit. But this time, it felt different. She stepped outside, laughed, caught snow on her tongue. Jack leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "You're not so bad at this normal life thing," he said. Ava tossed a snowball at his chest. "Give me time. I might just turn pro." Later that night, they lingered by the Bronco long after the tools had been packed away. Jack leaned over the hood, flicking a flashlight beam along the wiring. Ava leaned beside him, closer than usual. "You think it'll run again?" she asked. He nodded. "Eventually. Everything takes time, especially things that have been neglected." She didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "I don't think I came back here just for the truck." Jack didn't look at her, just said, "I know." Silence hung between them, not uncomfortable but thick with unspoken truths. Ava took a breath. "I was someone else before this, someone I don't really recognize anymore." Jack finally turned toward her. "You're someone now. That's what matters." The next day, Emily drew a picture of the three of them standing next to the Bronco. She added stars and trees and a heart above their heads. She tacked it to the garage wall without asking. Ava stared at it longer than she meant to, Jack noticed. Kids don't overthink things. They just draw what they see. Ava swallowed. Her voice came quiet. What if she sees something that isn't real? Jack looked her in the eye. Then maybe it's time to stop running and start being real. That night, Ava stood on the porch of her mother's cabin, wrapped in Jack's old flannel, watching the smoke rise from the chimney. The wind was cold, but her heart wasn't. She wasn't fixed. Not fully, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe healing wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about showing up every day, even when you were scared, even when you didn't have all the answers. She placed her hand on the porch railing, wood her mother once sanded, now weathered, but standing strong. Just like her. Spring crept slowly into Jackson Hole. The snowbanks melted day by day, revealing patches of brown earth and long-buried pine needles. Birds returned. So did laughter at the garage. Inside, the Bronco project was finally starting to resemble a working machine. The engine coughed and rumbled. Jack's hands moved with quiet precision. Ava leaned over wiring diagrams with real interest. Emily added finishing touches to a mural on the wall. Stars, gears, a tree with 3 sets of initials carved into its trunk, ECJCVS. For the first time in years, Ava felt almost whole. She still hadn't told Jack the truth. Not fully. She knew she was borrowing time. But it was so easy to get lost in the rhythm of this new life. The clang of wrenches, the smell of oil and sawdust, the soft weight of Emily's head on her shoulder during quiet moments. Still, the real world had a way of catching up. One crisp morning, Jack walked into the garage to find Emily sitting on the workbench, clutching a folded newspaper with excitement. "Daddy!" "Look, Viv's in the paper," he frowned. "What?" She handed him the front page of the Mountain Times. His heart stilled. Heart Venture, CEO resurfaces after mysterious hiatus. Below it was a glossy photo. Ava, stepping out of a local cafe, hand in hand with Emily. Her smile soft. The town's name listed clearly, Jackson Hole. Jack's fingers tightened around the paper. A rush of heat rose up his spine. Shock, anger, confusion. Emily looked up, innocent. "Is she in trouble?" He didn't answer. Just turned and walked into the garage, the paper crumpling in his fist. Later that afternoon, Ava returned. She walked in carrying coffee and a new part for the truck, her mood light. Until she saw the look on Jack's face. He was waiting for her, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. He didn't say much. Just held out the newspaper. She took it slowly. Her smile faded. Color drained from her cheeks. I was going to tell you." Jack's voice was quiet, but hard. "When? Before or after the next lie?" "I didn't lie," she whispered. "You let us believe you were someone else." Tears welled in her eyes. "I wasn't trying to deceive you. I just needed to remember who I was outside of all that. For once." Jack shook his head. "You came into our lives pretending to be someone else. My daughter trusted you. I trusted you." From the doorway, a small voice trembled. "I still do." They both turned. Emily stood there, arms crossed tight against her chest, eyes watery but fierce. "She wasn't fake," she said. "She was just scared." Ava broke then. Her composure cracked open like a shell, and she sank onto the nearest stool, hands over her face. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I never wanted to hurt either of you." But it was too late. In towns like Jackson Hole, news didn't travel. It flew. By the next morning, people whispered at the grocery store. Grace at the cafe greeted Ava with tight lips and quiet nods. The warmth that had greeted her in the beginning now folded in on itself, cautious, suspicious. That afternoon, a black luxury sedan pulled into the garage lot. Jack stepped outside, wiping his hands, frown already forming. The driver's door opened. Charles Whitmore, crisp suit. Sharper smile. "Ah, so this is where the Queen of the Cloud has been hiding." Jack's jaw tensed. "Who the hell are you?" Charles extended a hand Jack didn't take. "Charles Whitmore, chairman of Heart Ventures." "I'm here to collect what belongs to the company." Inside the garage, Ava appeared, her face pale, but her posture straight. "Charles, I told you." "You don't get to just walk away, Vivian. The board is preparing to freeze your personal assets, including the trust your mother left behind." Ava's face drained of color. Jack stepped forward. "She doesn't owe you a damn thing." Charles barely glanced at him. "That's where you're wrong. This isn't about loyalty or sentiment, Mr. Callahan. It's about billions of dollars and a brand that's unraveling." Then he turned to Ava, voice low. "You have until next week, or we bury everything." He got back in the car. The engine purred as he drove away, leaving tire marks and a silence too heavy for anyone to break. Ava collapsed onto the workbench. "I didn't know it would follow me here," she whispered. "I just wanted to build something real, with you, with Emily." Jack stared at her. So many words rushed through him, but none came out the way he wanted. Finally, he said the one thing that hurt most. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Her eyes filled. "Then I'll go." And she did. That night, dinner was quiet. Emily pushed peas around her plate. Jack barely touched his food. Finally, in the kind of voice that can only come from deep hurt, Emily whispered, "She didn't lie to hurt us." Jack looked up slowly. "You hurt her." He had no answer. Later, alone in the garage, he opened the drawer and pulled out the velvet pouch. The gold watch shimmered under the light. He ran a thumb over the engraving. "Forever, Mum." He let a tear fall. He hadn't cried in years. Not since the fire. Not since the last time he lost someone he wasn't ready to lose. In a hotel room 2 towns over, Ava stood on a balcony, the wind pulling at her hair, the city lights below flickering like distant regrets. She had risked everything for a sliver of peace, a moment of stillness. Now it was gone. But under the ache in her chest, something stubborn remained. Not hope exactly, but resolve. This wasn't the end. Not yet. For days after Ava left, Jackson Hole felt hollow. The mountains stood tall as ever. The snow continued its slow retreat. The shop opened every morning like clockwork. But something essential was missing. Jack Callahan could feel it in the silence, in the way Emily stopped running into the garage after school, in the way she lingered by the mural they'd made together and stared at the corner where Ava used to sit, always with a mug of coffee in one hand and grease under her nails. Even the Bronco sat still, its restoration paused mid-breath. Jack tried to throw himself into other projects, but every time he reached for a second mug or found a part laid out just so, he remembered. He remembered her laugh, her quiet listening, the way she looked at Emily, not like a stranger passing through, but like someone who wanted to belong. One night, while tucking Emily into bed, Jack sat on the edge of her mattress, unsure how to begin. "Kiddo," he said softly, "sometimes adults make mistakes." She rolled toward him, eyes serious. "Then say sorry." "You always tell me it matters." He stared at her, heart twisting. That night, long after she'd fallen asleep, Jack sat at the kitchen table, holding a photo of his late wife, Claire. In the image, she cradled baby Emily in her arms, light pouring in through their old cabin window. Grief stirred like an old wound. He had built his world around safety, around control, after losing Claire. He'd shut doors, drawn lines, kept everyone at arm's length. Then Ava had walked through a blizzard and right into his life. And without meaning to, she'd found the softest, most hidden parts of him. And he'd pushed her away. Out of fear, out of pride. In Denver, Ava stood before a long mahogany table in a boardroom that once echoed with her voice. Now it felt like enemy ground. At the head sat Charles Whitmore, sharp suit, sharper words. Around him, members of the Hart Ventures board stared down papers and laptops like judges at a sentencing. "We're prepared to freeze your personal accounts if you do not return," Charles said, his tone even. "The company cannot afford uncertainty." Ava didn't blink. She stood straight, her palms calm at her sides. "Then freeze them." A stunned silence followed. Charles leaned forward. "You're walking away from everything you built." "No," she said, voice firm but quiet. "I'm walking towards something better. You'll regret this." Ava met his gaze. "I already have." And just like that, she turned and walked out, heels soft against marble floors, heart pounding not with fear, but freedom. For the first time in years, she was no longer chasing headlines. She was chasing herself. Back in Jackson Hole, the air carried the scent of thawing earth and pine. Jack stood in the garage, staring at the Bronco. The hood was still open, the parts half assembled, but something in him shifted. He pulled out the velvet pouch from the drawer. The watch still gleamed. "Forever, Mum." A message she had left from the beginning. A plea to be remembered or forgiven. Later that afternoon, while Emily worked on homework, she slid a folded note onto his workbench. In her neat handwriting, it read, "Daddy, if someone is brave enough to say sorry, we should be brave enough to forgive." Jack's throat tightened. He picked up the phone. His hands shook. A few hours later, headlights cut through the dusk. Ava stepped out of a cab in front of the garage, her shoulders tense, her breath shallow. She hadn't expected forgiveness. She just needed to try. Jack met her halfway down the gravel drive. He looked tired. Real. Open. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I was scared," he said quietly. "Scared of losing what I wasn't even sure I deserved." Ava's eyes shimmered. "I was scared of not being enough." He reached for her hand. "You were always enough." And with those words, the weight between them shattered. She stepped forward, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her like he had the night he pulled her from the snow. Only this time, they were both choosing to stay. That night, under the soft hum of string lights, they sat on the porch swing behind the garage. Emily snuggled between them, fast asleep, her hand still clutching a half-finished drawing of the Bronco. Jack looked over at Ava. "I keep thinking about that night, the storm, finding you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I keep thinking, maybe I wasn't the only one who got saved." The stars above shimmered. The porch creaked gently beneath them. And in the quiet, they let themselves believe in a beginning, born not from perfection, but from broken pieces lovingly gathered and slowly made whole again. The boardroom had always felt like a battlefield. Polished oak, sharp suits, voices measured like chess moves. It was a space Ava Sinclair had once ruled with ruthless precision, closing billion-dollar deals before breakfast, her name whispered with awe in business circles. But on that day, as she stepped back into Hart Ventures Tower in Denver, she didn't feel like a CEO. She felt like someone returning to a past that no longer fit. Security let her in without a word. The receptionist looked up, startled but silent. Word had spread. The prodigal executive had returned. But not to take her seat back, to give it up. The board meeting began with tension thick as storm clouds. Charles Whitmore sat at the head, fingers steepled, eyes cold. "We've wasted enough time," he said. "Vivian, if you've come to accept the board's terms and resume your duties—" Ava didn't sit. Didn't blink. "I'm here to resign." Gasps rippled across the table. Charles laughed, short and humorless. "Don't be dramatic." Ava slid a letter across the table. "It's not drama, it's clarity." "You're throwing away your legacy," one board member said. "No," Ava replied, calm. "I'm choosing peace." The room exploded with questions, protests, legal threats, but Ava tuned it all out. She had made her decision long before the elevator doors opened. She no longer owed them explanations. She owed herself honesty. Walking out of that glass tower for the last time, Ava didn't look back. The city buzzed behind her. Cars, headlines, meetings she would no longer attend. She felt light. Not free of responsibility. She knew the consequences. Her personal accounts would be frozen. Her reputation would take a hit. She might lose everything she'd built from the outside in, but what she was gaining inside, that was priceless. For the first time in 2 decades, Ava Sinclair wasn't running toward success or away from grief. She was just walking forward, toward herself. Back in Jackson Hole, Jack noticed the change before she said a word. When Ava returned to the cabin, her steps were slower, but certain. She had a tired kind of peace about her, like someone who'd stopped pretending to be bulletproof. They stood in the garage, shoulder to shoulder, staring at the Bronco. Jack glanced sideways.
You okay? Ava nodded. I let it go. The job? The life that didn't belong to me anymore. Jack didn't press. He just handed her a wrench.
Then let's build something new. In the weeks that followed, Ava moved fully into the rhythm of the garage. She took over inventory. She learned to diagnose spark plug issues. She started leaving her phone in the glove compartment of her car, powered off. People in town began warming up again. Grace at the cafe gave her an extra scone one morning with a wink. A few of the local teens started dropping by to ask questions about the Bronco. Emily was the happiest of all. I think Viv's staying forever, she told her classmate proudly one day. She's better than any grown-up I've met. One night, after a long day at the shop, Ava sat with Jack on the porch, watching the stars emerge. The silence between them was gentle now. Shared. No longer filled with tension, but trust. Ava broke it softly. Do you ever feel like you built your whole life on something that doesn't matter anymore? Jack thought a moment. I used to think control kept me safe. After Claire died, I shut down. I thought if I could just keep things predictable, I'd never lose anything again. He looked at her. Turns out, the best things in life aren't safe or predictable. They're just worth it. Ava smiled. That's what I'm figuring out. That I don't have to prove I'm worth loving. I just have to live like I already am. Later that evening, she opened a small wooden box that had traveled with her through cities, hotels, and offices. Inside were two things: a faded photograph of her mother painting beside the Bronco, and a sealed letter labeled, "For when you're ready." Her mother's handwriting. Hands trembling, Ava opened it. My darling Vivian, if you're reading this, it means you've finally stopped running. I always knew you'd build something big, but I hoped more than anything you'd find people who loved you beyond your title, who saw the messy, brilliant, tender girl I knew. Let yourself be loved, Viv, even when it feels scary. Especially then. You are enough, just as you are. Love always, Mom. Tears streamed down Ava's cheeks, and for the first time in her adult life, she believed the words. The next morning, she walked into the garage before sunrise. Jack was already there, coffee in hand. She handed him a folded sheet of paper. He opened it. Transfer documents, her remaining equity, ownership of the garage. Official registration under the new name, Cole Sinclair Restoration Works. Jack stared. I can't take this. Ava shook her head, voice thick. You already have. You gave me a place to be more than my past. Let me give you something in return. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into his arms and held her like the home they'd both stopped believing they deserved, but somehow had found anyway. The sign went up quietly on a Thursday morning. Hand-painted, mounted above the garage door. Cole Sinclair Restoration Works, specializing in more than repairs. Emily had added a small red cardinal in the bottom corner. It was her idea, she said, something about second chances and flight. Ava stood beside Jack as the last screw was drilled in. No ribbon. No speeches, just the three of them, under a pale sky, hearts stitched together by months of pain, risk, and choice. It wasn't grand, but it was real. That weekend, the garage held its first free workshop. Teenagers from town showed up, some shy, some cocky, some just curious. Jack walked them through basic maintenance, how to change a tire, check fluids, listen to the rhythm of an engine. Ava floated through the space, handing out tools, answering questions, smiling more than she had in years. Emily passed out sandwiches she'd helped make, beaming every time someone thanked her. At the end of the day, one boy lingered behind, small for his age, eyes heavy with something older than he should have carried. He glanced at Jack. You think I could really do this? Jack crouched down, looked him straight in the eye. Kid, I think you already are. You just need someone to believe it. Tears glistened. The boy nodded and walked away, clutching a wrench like it was a lifeline. Ava watched the exchange from across the room, her chest aching in the best way. Later that night, as twilight spread across the valley, Jack and Ava sat out behind the garage, watching Emily chase fireflies. The mountains loomed gentle in the background. The stars blinked alive, one by one. Ava broke the silence. I used to think forgiveness was something you earned, like a prize. Jack looked at her. And now? She took a breath. Now I think it's a choice. One we give even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. He nodded. Emily taught me that. Ava smiled. She teaches both of us. In the weeks that followed, the town slowly softened. People stopped by, not just for repairs, but for stories. Miss Thelma brought cinnamon rolls and asked about new grant applications for the Heart Foundation. A young mother came in with a broken toaster and left an hour later in tears after Ava listened, really listened, to her struggles. Word spread, not just about the shop, but about what it stood for. Kindness. Community. Second chances. The very things Ava had once considered soft, even weak, were now the foundation of the strongest thing she'd ever built. One afternoon, Jack pulled an old box from the back of the storage loft. Inside were pieces of his life he hadn't touched in years, photos of Claire, old blueprints for the garage, even a letter he'd written to Emily when she was born, but never given her. He showed the box to Ava. This used to be the stuff I was scared to remember. She traced her fingers along the edge of a photo. Now? Jack looked at her. Now I think remembering is the only way I know I've lived. That evening, Ava brought out a surprise. A framed print of the mural Emily had drawn. A tree with 3 initials carved into its roots. ECJCAS. They hung it on the garage wall together. No words, just smiles. A week later, Ava stood in the cabin kitchen, making coffee while Emily sat at the table, scribbling planets and stars. Jack came in, holding mail. Among the envelopes, a check from the board at Heart Ventures. The final payment. A clean break. Ava held it in her hand for a moment before setting it aside. It doesn't feel like a win, she said quietly. Jack stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. That's because you already won, he murmured. You chose you. That night, Emily insisted on reading a bedtime story to both of them. She made them sit on the floor beside her bed while she read from a worn picture book. Halfway through, she looked up and said, I think families don't always start with who you're born to. Sometimes they start when you least expect it, like in a snowstorm. Neither Jack nor Ava spoke. They didn't need to. Back on the porch, under stars thick as memory, Ava leaned into Jack's side. Thank you, she whispered. Jack squeezed her hand. For what? For not letting go, even when I ran. He turned to her. I didn't hold on because I knew how it would end. I held on because for the first time I wanted to try. Ava's voice caught. And now? He kissed her, soft and certain. Now, I want to stay. By the time summer settled in, word had spread far beyond Jackson Hole. Cole Sinclair Restoration Works wasn't just a garage anymore. It had become something else entirely. People came for oil changes and brake repairs, sure, but they stayed for something deeper. For the conversations over black coffee, for the murals Emily painted in the back corner, for the warmth that lingered like sunlight on old wood. They came because the place felt like hope with a front door. It started simply. An elderly man brought in his late wife's sewing machine. The thing hadn't worked in years. He didn't want it repaired to use. He just wanted to hear it hum again. For memory's sake. Jack and Ava worked on it after hours. When the motor finally whirred to life, the man cried quietly. He left a box of handwritten poems in thanks. Ava posted one by the door. When you think all things are gone to rust, find a place where hearts are brushed from dust. Then came a teenage girl, tough exterior.
Greasy hoodie. She showed up asking questions Jack knew most people wouldn't answer. Think I could learn how to rebuild a carburetor? She asked. Jack raised an eyebrow. You think you're ready to get your hands dirty? She smirked. I already am. By the end of the summer, she was volunteering twice a week, talking about trade school and drawing engine diagrams in a notebook Ava gave her. Next was a young single mother. Her toddler's toy truck had broken. She brought it in with an embarrassed laugh. He won't sleep without it. I know it's silly. Ava took the toy gently, opened its plastic casing, and found the loose wire. She fixed it in 15 minutes. The woman stayed for 2 hours, cried over shared tea, left with more than a mended toy. She left with someone who finally saw her. Every Saturday, the garage held free workshops, not just for teens, but for anyone who wanted to learn. Jack taught the basics of engine care. Ava started a series on small business budgeting. Miss Thelma brought pies and encouraged the shy ones. Emily handed out crayons and paper for younger kids. It became a ritual, a rhythm, and in that rhythm, people began to stitch together pieces of themselves they didn't even know were broken. In the back office, Ava quietly launched the Heart Foundation using what remained of her personal assets. The first grant supported single parents in the valley. The second, apprenticeships for high school students interested in trade careers. Applications poured in, not because people wanted handouts, but because they finally had someone to believe in their worth. Ava spent late nights reading each one. She cried often, and for once, the tears weren't from exhaustion, but from being deeply, humbly moved. One bright Saturday, Ava stood in the garage doorway as families gathered for the monthly workshop. Emily was chasing a puppy someone brought. Jack was explaining a timing belt to a boy with wide, eager eyes. Ava breathed in the scent of engine oil, cinnamon scones, and possibility. She turned and saw a mural on the far wall she hadn't noticed growing. Emily must have painted it late in the evenings. It showed a heart-shaped tree with roots wrapped around scattered tools, wrenches, gears, bolts, and 3 initials carved into the trunk, JC, EC, AS. And above the tree, in a banner of childlike handwriting, everyone's worth fixing. Ava's eyes filled. Later that night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, she and Jack sat on the back steps, sipping lemonade. Fireflies blinked across the tall grass. Ava leaned her head against his shoulder. I never imagined this is how it would all turn out, she said. Jack looked out at the twilight. I don't think we turned it into anything. He nodded toward the garage, now glowing softly in the distance. I think it turned us into something. The next week, a journalist showed up, a woman from Community Roots magazine, camera bag slung over one shoulder, mud on her boots, and a sharp curiosity in her eyes. Someone sent us a photo of your mural, she said to Ava, with a note that said, sometimes restoration starts with people, not machines. Ava smiled gently. Sounds like something Emily would do. The interview was honest, unpolished. When the reporter asked what made the garage special, Ava didn't mention numbers or grants. She just said, we don't fix machines. We remind people they're not broken beyond repair. The feature ran online the following week. Photos of the mural, of Jack teaching, of Ava with her arm around a teenage apprentice, of Emily smiling wide beneath a future mechanic's shirt. The article was titled, Where Broken Things Come to Heal, and People Too. It was shared thousands of times. Not because the garage was impressive, but because the story was real. And late that night, long after everyone else had gone home, Ava stood alone in the garage, tracing the outline of the heart-shaped tree. Jack entered quietly, watching her from the doorway. We didn't plan this, she said without turning. Nope, but it's ours. He nodded. And in the soft hum of the shop, the hum that once meant work and now meant purpose, they stood together, knowing that they'd built something not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever believed they were beyond saving. The garage lights glowed warmly against the early autumn dusk. Inside, laughter echoed between the walls, mixed with the scent of motor oil, cinnamon, and coffee. The last workshop of the season had just wrapped up, and the benches were still scattered with crayon drawings, socket wrenches, and half-finished stories. Jack stood near the back wall, his arm wrapped gently around Ava's waist. Emily danced barefoot across the concrete floor, twirling beneath strands of soft string lights. She wore overalls stained with grease and a smile that had grown stronger over the months. The kind of smile only safety, love, and belonging could build. Ava looked up at the mural. The heart-shaped tree Emily had painted, now fully surrounded by the initials of new volunteers, apprentices, and friends. What began as a garage had truly become something far more. A sanctuary, a second chance. Not just for machines, but for people like her, and Jack, and every soul that walked through those doors thinking they were too broken to matter. That morning, Ava had received the final documents from her lawyer. The last of her ties to Heart Ventures were officially severed. No more board meetings. No more quarterly reports. No more wondering if she was enough without the title. She signed with a steady hand. And didn't cry, because for the first time in her life, she felt whole. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the Tetons, Jack called Emily and Ava to the back porch. A picnic blanket had been laid out under the fading sky. A lantern glowed beside a small wooden box. Ava blinked, amused. "What's all this?" Jack cleared his throat. "I had something in storage, something I'd been holding on to." He opened the box and pulled out a small hand-carved sign. It read, "Welcome home." Ava stared at it, quiet for a long moment. "Jack." He set it gently at the base of the porch. "This place stopped being just mine the day you walked back into it." Emily chimed in, bouncing on her toes. "Can we hang it tonight, please?" Ava nodded, eyes misty. "Let's do it together." As they mounted the sign, Jack looked at Ava. "I don't need a ceremony. I don't need paperwork. But if you ever wondered..." He paused. "You're already my family." Ava's voice trembled. "And you're mine." Emily wrapped her arms around both of them, squeezing tight. "Then it's official." "We're weird, but we're a team." They laughed, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that heals it. The months rolled on, slow and golden. Autumn brought crisp air and long shadows. Ava began teaching a weekly workshop for local women interested in starting small businesses. Jack mentored young apprentices from the county high school. Emily painted a second mural, this one filled with stars, open doors, and the words, "Come as you are." At Thanksgiving, they hosted a potluck at the garage. Neighbors, former clients, friends and strangers crowded in with casserole dishes, folding chairs, and stories. There was no formal toast, just a shared knowing that something rare had taken root in that place. Ava looked around and whispered to Jack, "We planted more than a business." He nodded, eyes soft. "We planted a family." One evening, as winter threatened the horizon again, Ava found herself walking alone down the snowy path near the cabin. It had been nearly a year since that storm, the night she'd collapsed in the driver's seat of a luxury SUV, frozen from exhaustion, grief, and pressure no human was meant to bear alone. She remembered Jack's hands, steady and strong as they brought her back to life. She remembered Emily's eyes, wide with wonder, open with grace. She remembered the woman she'd been then. Hollow, lost, and she smiled, because she wasn't that woman anymore. She was still healing, but now she was never healing alone.
That night, back inside the cabin, Jack lit a fire while Emily and Ava curled up with old photographs. One showed Ava's mother, Lillian, painting in the mountains. Another showed baby Emily in Jack's arms, a life before loss. They laid the photos side by side. Different stories, same thread of.
Ava leaned her head on Jack's shoulder. Sometimes I wonder how much pain could have been spared if I'd slowed down sooner, if I'd come back here. Years ago. Jack kissed her forehead. Sometimes the pain is what clears the path. She closed her eyes, letting that truth sink in. They didn't need a perfect beginning. They had chosen a beautiful middle, full of mess, of mending, of moments that stitched them together. As snow began to fall outside, Emily slipped a new drawing onto the fridge. It showed 3 people holding hands beneath a starry sky. Beside them, a bright red Bronco, headlights glowing. Above it, she'd written, "We didn't find each other. We built each other." And maybe that was the greatest restoration of all. Not just of an old truck. Not just of a garage, but of hearts, of homes. Of people once shattered, now whole again. Not because they were perfect, but because they chose to believe in each other anyway. Life, much like an old engine, sometimes needs more than a quick fix. It needs care, patience, and a belief that restoration is possible. Jack and Ava's story reminds us that no one is beyond healing. Not a broken heart, not a quiet garage, not even a life that's lost its way. For older adults who've carried decades of responsibility, loss, or regret, this tale is a gentle nudge that it's never too late to begin again. Forgiveness of others and ourselves isn't a reward we earn. It's a choice we make, one that opens the door to connection. Ava's journey shows that stepping away from titles, expectations, and past mistakes can lead us back to what truly matters, people who see us, love us, and grow with us. And Jack reminds us that strength isn't just about protection, it's about vulnerability too. In a world moving too fast, sometimes the most radical thing we can do is slow down, offer someone a second chance, and allow our own hearts to be seen. After all, some of the best things in life aren't found. They're built, one act of kindness, one act of courage at a time.